The air was thick with tension, a silence so heavy it seemed to press against every ear in the room. Cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing the expressions that words could never convey. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, knowing that whatever unfolded here would be dissected for weeks, maybe months, to come. At the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, calm, focused, every movement deliberate, her eyes locking on the man across the table. Kash Patel shifted uneasily in his seat, aware that today, the stakes were higher than ever. Every whispered strategy, every media leak, every calculated political maneuver had led to this singular moment. Outside, the murmurs of a restless public buzzed through the halls. Social media alerts lit up phones in real time, as if the entire country were holding its breath. Everyone knew something historic was about to happen. And in that charged atmosphere, the question on everyone's mind was the same: could Patel withstand the scrutiny he had long evaded, or was this finally the moment the truth would break through? This was more than a confrontation, it was a turning point. One question, one answer, or the lack of it would determine not just careers, but the very narrative of accountability in real time. You couldn't afford to blink. Don't miss a single question, answer, or reaction. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Be part of the audience witnessing history unfold live, experiencing every tense moment as it happens. If you're not here, you'll only hear whispers later. Stay informed, stay engaged, and be the first to know. The story that brought Jasmine Crockett and Kash Patel face to face didn't appear overnight. It was years in the making, a culmination of political maneuvering, legal battles, and public scrutiny that had been quietly simmering behind closed doors. Patel, a figure who had built his reputation navigating the intricate corridors of power, had long been known for his strategic acumen, but also for a pattern of evasive answers and selective transparency. Crockett, in contrast, had emerged as a relentless advocate for accountability, her career defined by pursuing truth even when it made the powerful uncomfortable. The tension between them was more than personal, it was emblematic of a larger struggle over the integrity of public institutions. This confrontation was rooted in a series of hearings that had captivated the nation. Crockett had spent months compiling records, analyzing testimony, and connecting dots that others had either ignored or deliberately obscured. Every document, every statement, and every leaked memo painted a picture of a system at risk, from questionable policy decisions to behind-the-scenes lobbying that skirted ethical boundaries. The public had begun to notice patterns, and media coverage reflected the growing unease. Headlines had ranged from cautiously analytical to outright alarmed, capturing a sense that something unprecedented was about to unfold. Contrast was key to understanding the stakes. On one side was the risk of continued misinformation, obfuscation, and erosion of trust in democratic processes. On the other, Crockett represented a commitment to truth and transparency, a voice insisting that public officials must be held accountable for their actions. Every unanswered question, every half-truth propagated in public forums, carried consequences for ordinary citizens, people who relied on accurate information to make decisions about governance, public safety, and the direction of the nation. In this light, the confrontation was never just about Crockett and Patel, it was about the public's right to clarity, the preservation of democratic norms, and the principle that no one is above scrutiny. The build-up to this day was marked by high-profile moments that amplified the tension. In previous hearings, Patel had deflected, providing statements carefully crafted to avoid direct answers. Media outlets dissected his every word, sometimes praising his composure, other times questioning the substance beneath the rhetoric. Behind the scenes, political operatives debated strategy, legal teams prepared for worst-case scenarios, and journalists sought leaks that could tip the balance. Crockett's meticulous preparation contrasted sharply with Patel's reliance on rehearsed narratives, highlighting a central theme: the power of diligence, integrity, and fearless questioning in the face of entrenched authority. Public interest had reached a fever pitch. Social media discussions, op-eds, and televised commentary framed the upcoming confrontation as a pivotal test of accountability. Voices across civic-minded communities emphasized the broader implications. If Patel could sidestep scrutiny yet again, it would reinforce a dangerous precedent of opacity. If Crockett succeeded, it would signal that truth and diligence could prevail, inspiring confidence in oversight and reinforcing the principle that public servants must answer to the people they serve. Every element documents, prior testimony, leaked communications, media speculation set the stage for an encounter that was as much symbolic as it was concrete. It was a collision of values, secrecy versus transparency, evasion versus accountability, and power leveraged for personal or political gain versus responsibility to the public. For viewers attuned to justice, democracy, and civic engagement, the stakes were unmistakable. This was the moment when months, even years, of scrutiny would converge in a single, defining exchange. It was a confrontation the country had been waiting for, a test of whether truth could finally pierce through calculated at every element documents, prior testimony, leaked communications, media speculation set the stage for an encounter that was as much symbolic as it was concrete. It was a collision of values, secrecy versus transparency, evasion versus accountability, and power leveraged for personal or political gain versus responsibility to the public. For viewers attuned to justice, democracy, and civic engagement, the stakes were unmistakable. This was the moment when months, even years, of scrutiny would converge in a single, defining exchange. It was a confrontation the country had been waiting for, a test of whether truth could finally pierce through calculated ambiguity, and a challenge that would leave no one untouched by its implications. Jasmine Crockett entered the public arena with a reputation that preceded her, principled, unflinching, and strategically brilliant. Every step of her career reflected a commitment to accountability, a refusal to let power shield wrongdoing. Her intelligence wasn't flashy, it was precise, methodical, and quietly relentless, the kind of intellect that could unravel complex schemes and expose hidden truths. Those who had faced her in hearings before described her as unshakable, her questions surgical, her timing impeccable. Crockett's moral clarity wasn't just a personal virtue, it was a weapon, one that transformed her from a skilled lawyer into a figure capable of challenging the entrenched power structures many thought untouchable. She represented not only legal rigor but also the principle that public servants are accountable to the people, a truth that resonated deeply with civic-minded audiences. Across the table sat Kash Patel, the archetype of a high-stakes political operator. Ambitious and calculating, Patel had built a career on navigating gray areas, knowing exactly how far to stretch boundaries without snapping the cords of scrutiny. He was articulate and poised under pressure, able to deflect, distract, and pivot in ways that had confounded journalists and politicians alike. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay vulnerabilities, reliance on rehearsed narratives, a tendency to avoid direct answers, and the subtle cracks in public perception that Crockett had spent months studying. What made Patel a formidable antagonist was not malice but mastery, the skill of surviving political storms, but mastery can falter when faced with precision and integrity, and Crockett was about to test every one of his defenses. Supporting players added layers of tension to the scene. Crockett's legal team, a cadre of sharp minds, ensured every detail was anticipated, evidence catalogued, precedents analyzed, strategy rehearsed. Patel's aides hovered at the edge, whispering reminders and contingencies, their anxiety a silent admission of the stakes. Media figures, some sympathetic, some skeptical, circled the confrontation like predators sensing a turning tide, ready to broadcast every reaction, every pause, every faltering moment. Political operatives whispered predictions and scenarios, aware that the outcome here would ripple far beyond the walls of the hearing room. In this high-stakes environment, every character mattered, every interaction carried weight, and every glance or gesture could shift the balance. Crockett's heroism, Patel's calculated tension, and the surrounding cast created a charged atmosphere where truth and strategy would collide and history would watch. The morning of the hearing, the city seemed to hold its breath. Crockett arrived early, briefcase in hand, moving through the hallways with the calm precision of someone who had done this countless times before, but inside, her mind raced, running through documents, notes, and lines of questioning. Every piece of evidence, every memo, every testimony from months prior was replayed in her mind. She reviewed timelines, cross-referenced statements, and imagined every possible evasive maneuver Patel might attempt. Her aides hovered quietly, flipping through folders, murmuring quietly about potential pitfalls. Outside the room, the media swarmed, their cameras and microphones a constant reminder that this moment was being watched by millions. Meanwhile, Patel's team was orchestrating a different kind of preparation. In a sleek office across town, aides gathered around a polished conference table, strategizing. If she goes there, he can pivot to policy. Don't let her trap him on the email chain, one whispered, while another suggested rehearsing responses to anticipated questions. Patel, ever composed, leaned back in his chair, studying the notes before him. His calm exterior belied the tension in the room. The repeated leaks of memos and prior statements had shaken even his seasoned confidence. Every word he had ever spoken in public, every previous testimony, was suddenly a potential landmine, and Crockett was poised to navigate them all with surgical precision. Media outlets were already fueling the suspense. Headlines flashed across websites. Crockett prepares to confront Patel on controversial decisions, and will Patel finally answer the questions that stumped journalists for months? Social media amplified the anticipation, turning the upcoming exchange into a trending topic. Analysts debated what Crockett might ask, fans speculated on Patel's possible responses, and civic-minded viewers prepared for the historic showdown, knowing that missing this moment meant only hearing about it secondhand. Even inside the hearing room, the air carried an invisible charge. Crockett glanced at Patel, who returned a measured, controlled stare. Neither spoke yet, but their silence was loaded with meaning. She had studied his patterns, understood his deflections, and had rehearsed the question that would expose every inconsistency in his previous testimony. Patel, on the other hand, had memorized talking points, practiced diversions, and prepared to shift the focus if necessary. Both understood the stakes. One question, one moment, could alter the narrative completely. Snippets of conversation leaked to the press hinted at the tension behind the scenes. This could be the defining moment of the year, a source whispered to a reporter. Another leaked note suggested Crockett had uncovered documents that could corner Patel in ways no one expected. The public was buzzing, the anticipation growing by the hour, as every article and tweet reinforced the sense that this was not just a hearing, but a historic confrontation. Crockett's aides whispered last-minute reminders, adjusting details and reinforcing strategy. Patel's team adjusted seating arrangements and rehearsed cues, their calm masking the underlying anxiety. The contrast could not have been clearer: Crockett's quiet intensity versus Patel's controlled composure, preparation versus practice deflection, integrity versus calculated performance. Every second that passed amplified the suspense. And then, beneath it all, the anticipation of the one question hung in the air like an unspoken promise. Everyone in that room, from the journalists capturing every angle to the public tracking live updates online, knew this question was coming. No one yet knew its content, but the weight it carried was palpable. It was the question that could unravel months of carefully crafted narratives, the question that could finally tip the scales in favor of accountability. Every glance, every whispered instruction, every camera click was a heartbeat toward a moment that no one would forget. The world was watching, and when Crockett finally asked the question, the reverberations would be felt far beyond the walls of that room. This was the calm before a storm, the silent seconds before history shifted in real time. The moment had arrived. The hearing room was alive with anticipation, every seat filled, cameras perched on every edge, and the murmur of whispers bouncing off the polished wood panels. The overhead lights cast a clinical glow, illuminating the polished mahogany table where history was about to unfold. Reporters leaned forward, fingers poised over recorders, knowing that a single hesitation, a single stumble, would be immortalized in headlines within minutes. The room seemed to breathe as one, a collective inhalation before the inevitable exhalation of revelation. Jasmine Crockett sat upright, her posture impeccable, her eyes locked on Kash Patel. She adjusted her notes just enough to draw attention to the meticulous preparation behind them. The quiet confidence in her demeanor contrasted sharply with the subtle tension etched on Patel's face. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression, the slightest furrow of a brow, the minuscule tightening of a jaw. The room was silent except for the occasional click of a camera, the hum of equipment, and the faint shuffle of papers. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but deliberate, cutting through the charged silence. "Mr. Patel," she began, eyes unwavering, "in light of the communications obtained through the Freedom of Information requests, can you explain why you directed internal emails regarding the policy decisions on January 14 to be withheld from congressional oversight? Please answer truthfully." A ripple ran through the room. Gasps, barely audible, threaded through the audience. Reporters exchanged glances, instantly recognizing the weight of the question. Patel blinked, his practiced composure momentarily faltering. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then attempted a carefully measured response. "Well, as I've said in previous statements, those emails were part of a broader operational discussion." Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her voice sharpening with moral clarity. "Operational discussion or deliberate concealment, Mr. Patel? The distinction matters. The public deserves to know whether their representatives are being misled or whether transparency was intentionally obstructed." The room held its breath. Patel's hand tightened around his notes, shuffling them nervously. His eyes darted to his aides, seeking rescue, but none came. He tried to redirect. "I believe the context is clear in the policy framework," and Crockett's interruption was surgical, precise. "No, Mr. Patel. The context is not clear. You've been asked to provide clarity, not reinterpretation. Can you confirm whether you personally instructed the withholding of those communications?" Silence stretched, thick and almost tangible. In slow motion, the audience leaned forward, journalists adjusted cameras, every eye in the room focused on Patel. His fingers drummed a nervous rhythm on the table. He inhaled, exhaled, and finally, the words faltered on his lips. I can't comment on that." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. The subtle shift in air pressure, the rustle of papers, the barely perceptible gasp of an aide, they all signaled the unraveling of carefully constructed defenses. Crockett's eyes remained steady, unwavering, but the tension in her jaw hinted at the gravity of the moment. She pressed on, leaning slightly forward. "You can't comment. Let me remind you, sir, that withholding information from oversight is a serious matter. Are you suggesting that it occurred without your knowledge, or are you refusing accountability?" The audience tensed further. Patrons shifted in their seats, a cameraman adjusted focus, capturing Patel's hesitation from every angle. Patel swallowed hard, the veneer of control slipping like sand through fingers. I he stammered, eyes flicking to the ceiling as if an answer might appear midair. But none did. Crockett's gaze was unrelenting, her moral clarity a spotlight that illuminated every shadow of evasion. Slow motion seemed to frame the next seconds. The room felt suspended in time. Patel's lips moved, barely audible, "I cannot." The words hung like a verdict. Crockett's hand rested lightly on the table, her posture still calm but commanding. The subtle smirk of a journalist, the half-hidden shock of an aide, the collective tension of the audience, it all crystallized into a single, unforgettable moment. Crockett leaned back slightly, allowing the silence to amplify the impact. "Let me be clear, Mr. Patel," she said softly but with undeniable authority, "truth isn't negotiable, and accountability isn't optional. The public deserves answers, and history will remember who provided them and who did not." Gasps rippled through the room once more. Some audience members whispered to neighbors, the tension palpable in hushed tones. Cameras captured Patel's momentary slump, his failure to produce the answer that could have deflected scrutiny. The slow pivot of Crockett's gaze across the room, the deliberate calm of her breathing, the sharp intake from a journalist scribbling notes, it was a cinematic symphony of revelation, tension, and emotional resonance. Every micro-gesture mattered. Patel's eyes darted to a legal aide, his mouth opened and closed, hesitation radiating like electricity. Crockett's poised composure contrasted perfectly with the chaos of evasion. In that room, for that moment, power had shifted not through force, but through precision, clarity, and the courage to ask what no one else dared. The cameras continued to roll, but it felt like the world had paused. Outside, millions followed live feeds, social media exploded, and hashtags began trending before the room had even cleared. Crockett had asked the question, Patel could not answer, and in doing so, the narrative had irrevocably changed. History, in real time, had just witnessed a moment of accountability that would echo far beyond the walls of the hearing room. For a fleeting moment, the room seemed suspended between two realities: Patel's carefully constructed composure teetering on the edge, and Crockett's unwavering command of the narrative. The air that had been thick with tension now began to vibrate with anticipation, the energy shifting subtly but unmistakably. Every eye followed the exchange, every camera lens capturing the imperceptible movement that marked a turning point. Crockett's question had landed like a lightning strike, exposing cracks in Patel's armor that no rehearsed talking point could mend. Patel's attempt at evasion faltered completely. His hands, previously steady, now trembled slightly over his notes, the color in his face shifted under the harsh fluorescent lights. He opened his mouth, paused, and closed it again, as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. In contrast, Crockett leaned forward with measured authority, her posture radiating control, her calm eyes piercing the haze of confusion. The audience felt it, the shift from uncertainty to clarity, from tension to undeniable authority. One question, one deliberate moment, and the balance of power had tilted irreversibly. Journalists in the room began murmuring softly, a ripple of acknowledgement spreading through the rows. Some scribbled furiously, others exchanged looks that said everything words could not. Social media notifications buzzed simultaneously, a digital echo of the seismic change occurring in real time. Analysts would later replay this instant, dissecting Crockett's timing, her phrasing, and the way she had patiently yet relentlessly cornered Patel without aggression, her brilliance in strategy visible for all to see. Even Patel's aides shifted in their seats, their whispered directions now tinged with concern. The carefully prepared defenses were crumbling, and the vulnerability was palpable. The contrast could not have been sharper. Patel, once a symbol of calculated control, now appeared uncertain, reactive, and exposed. Crockett, in comparison, embodied deliberate mastery, moral clarity, and strategic foresight. She had transformed the tension in the room into a tool, directing it to illuminate the truth, while Patel struggled under the weight of scrutiny he had long avoided. Outside the room, the public sensed the moment's significance. Social media lit up with comments, debates, and predictions. Civic-minded viewers recognized that this wasn't just a personal victory or political maneuver, it was a tangible demonstration of accountability in action. This is the moment everyone will be talking about. Tomorrow, one headline would later read, capturing the gravity of the shift. The energy in the room mirrored the energy online, an invisible thread connecting witnesses in real time to a moment that would define public discourse. Crockett's brilliance was subtle but undeniable. She allowed Patel no room to recover, no opportunity to deflect, and no ambiguity to cling to. Each word, each pause, each measured glance reinforced her authority, creating a rhythm that the room followed instinctively. In that carefully orchestrated tension, Crockett had done more than ask a question. She had seized the narrative, transforming what could have been another procedural hearing into a decisive, historical turning point. By the time the room exhaled collectively, the shift was complete. Patel's vulnerability had been exposed, Crockett's authority established, and the public narrative rewritten in a single, deliberate exchange. The moment's resonance would ripple far beyond the hearing room. Journalists, allies, and the public all recognized it as a breakthrough that symbolized the power of courage, strategy, and truth prevailing over evasion and pretense. The weight of Crockett's position wasn't built on rhetoric alone, it was anchored in a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Months of meticulous research had unearthed documents, internal communications, and recordings that painted a clear, unbroken narrative of decisions made behind closed doors. One memo, sent months prior to the public hearing, outlined a strategy to limit disclosure to oversight committees, language so precise that any attempt to claim ignorance would have been implausible. Crockett's team had cross-referenced these internal directives with prior public statements, exposing a pattern of selective transparency that left no room for ambiguity. Among the most damning pieces was a series of email exchanges between Patel and senior aides. Each message, carefully dated and archived, revealed instructions to withhold key information from both congressional oversight and public records requests. Crockett highlighted specific lines during her questioning, juxtaposing them with Patel's public assurances of openness. The contrast was stark. The narrative Patel presented to the public directly contradicted the actions he had orchestrated behind the scenes. In every expert's eyes, the discrepancy was clear evidence of intentional misdirection. But evidence wasn't limited to paper trails. Investigative reporters had recorded multiple interviews with whistleblowers who described pressure campaigns and informal directives aimed at curbing transparency. These first-hand accounts painted a human picture of policy manipulation, turning abstract documents into real consequences for governance. Staffers recalled tense meetings, hushed warnings, and a pervasive sense that accountability could be circumvented by those in power. Crockett's team wove these testimonies into the narrative, connecting the dots between high-level strategy and real-world impacts. Policy implications were immediate and undeniable. The documents revealed how critical decisions affecting public health, resource allocation, and regulatory oversight had been influenced or obstructed by these internal communications. Analysts noted that such interference had the potential to compromise the integrity of governmental processes, undermining the public's trust in elected officials. Crockett's presentation of these receipts wasn't just an exposé, it was a blueprint showing exactly where accountability had been bypassed, and why rectification was urgent. The room felt the gravity of these revelations. Journalists leaned forward, eyes scanning highlighted passages. Every camera lens caught Patel's subtle reactions, tightened lips, the flicker of concern in his eyes as Crockett methodically laid out the evidence. The juxtaposition of written records, recorded testimonies, and policy implications created a narrative impossible to dispute. Each piece reinforced the other, a chain of proof that painted Patel not as an incompetent administrator, but as a calculated manipulator of information. Expert commentary bolstered the human and institutional impact. Constitutional scholars noted the seriousness of obstructing oversight, while civic watchdogs emphasized the broader ramifications for democracy. Viewers could trace a direct line from the documents to decisions affecting everyday lives: communities denied resources, initiatives stalled, and public trust eroded. Crockett's skill lay in translating abstract, bureaucratic evidence into tangible stakes, allowing the audience to see why these documents mattered not just in legal terms, but in human terms. The combination of receipts, whistleblower accounts, and expert insight crystallized the confrontation into an unassailable argument. Every piece of evidence underscored a single truth: accountability had been sidestepped, public trust undermined, and a carefully constructed narrative of transparency had been exposed as a facade. Crockett's presentation wasn't about theatrics, it was about revealing reality. By connecting the paper trail to human impact and policy consequences, she made it impossible for Patel or anyone watching to ignore the stakes. This was the moment when abstract allegations became concrete, when evasions met undeniable proof. The evidence Crockett presented didn't just support her position, it demanded action, demanded accountability, and demanded that the public recognize the real consequences of unchecked power. Every document, every testimony, every recorded directive reinforced a simple but devastating conclusion: truth mattered, and today, it had been illuminated for all to see. Beyond the documents, the emails, and the carefully parsed statements, the true cost of Patel's evasions was felt by real people, families, communities, and everyday citizens whose lives had been quietly shaped, and sometimes upended, by the decisions made in closed offices. Crockett knew this, and her approach reflected it. Every question, every piece of evidence, was tied not to abstract bureaucracy, but to human consequence. The stakes were tangible, immediate, and heartbreakingly clear. In one city, a community clinic struggled to provide essential services because funding and regulatory decisions had been delayed or misrepresented in oversight communications. Patients with chronic conditions faced longer waits, essential programs were postponed, and public health initiatives suffered setbacks. Local activists had tried to raise concerns, but their calls were filtered through layers of bureaucracy that Patel's office had carefully controlled. The emails Crockett presented revealed the intentional misalignment between public assurances and behind-the-scenes actions, a stark illustration of how decisions at the top ripple outward to affect the most vulnerable. Then there were the whistleblowers, employees who risked careers to reveal the truth. One mid-level analyst described the constant pressure to downplay data, to omit inconvenient details, and to present a narrative that matched political convenience rather than factual reality. "We were told to report optimism, even when the numbers told a different story," she recounted in a recorded interview, her voice trembling with the memory. The human strain of systemic manipulation became undeniable in Crockett's narrative, creating an emotional resonance that statistics alone could never convey. Parents, students, and community leaders across the country followed the hearing closely. Social media lit up with first-hand accounts of frustration and anxiety, programs delayed, policy decisions misunderstood, and trust eroded. Crockett's confrontation transformed these abstract frustrations into a tangible, accountable moment. The audience saw not just a political exchange, but the direct consequences for their lives, their families, and their communities. It was a bridge between the corridors of power and the sidewalks of everyday America, making the stakes painfully real. Crockett's brilliance lay in connecting these human stories to systemic accountability. Each example, each personal narrative, highlighted the importance of transparency and the dangers of misinformation. By framing her questions around the lives affected, she reminded the public that governance wasn't about abstract strategy, it was about tangible outcomes that determined safety, opportunity, and justice. The emotional impact was amplified by contrast. Patel's evasions, so polished and rehearsed, now stood starkly against the raw, lived experiences of ordinary people. As the hearing progressed, the audience, both in the room and across the nation, could feel the shift. Crockett's insistence on truth wasn't merely procedural, it was profoundly human. For citizens who had felt invisible in policy decisions, this confrontation represented hope, a signal that accountability was possible, that those who wielded power could be questioned, and that the consequences of decisions made behind closed doors mattered. By the end of the session, the weight of human consequence hung heavily in the room. Families who had struggled with delayed programs, employees who had risked everything to speak truth, and communities seeking justice all had a champion in Crockett. Her confrontation was not just a moment of political triumph, it was a reaffirmation that power has consequences, that transparency can change lives, and that one determined voice can hold even the most powerful accountable. The hearing ended, but its reverberations were just beginning. Media outlets erupted, live feeds replayed the exchange, and headlines captured the gravity of Crockett's performance. Crockett exposes Patel's evasions in historic hearing, and one question, one moment, unraveling a narrative. Analysts dissected every gesture, pause, and phrase, turning the confrontation into a case study in accountability and strategic questioning. Social media erupted with commentary, clips went viral, and hashtags praising Crockett's courage trended nationally. Civic-minded audiences recognized a watershed moment, transparency had been enforced, and evasions could no longer hide in plain sight. Political fallout was immediate. Allies of Patel scrambled to contain the narrative, issuing statements attempting to reframe the exchange, but the documentation and public record spoke for themselves. Opponents and progressive leaders seized the moment, framing it as proof that persistent inquiry and moral clarity could hold power accountable. Public perception shifted. Crockett was no longer simply a skilled legislator, she became a symbol of diligence, courage, and principled leadership. Patel, meanwhile, faced scrutiny on multiple fronts, his credibility weakened in ways that would affect both immediate and long-term influence. Experts weighed in, highlighting the systemic implications. Constitutional scholars emphasized the precedent set for congressional oversight, while civic watchdogs underscored the importance of public engagement in demanding transparency. Media commentators praised Crockett's preparation and poise, noting how one strategically delivered question could illuminate patterns of concealment and force accountability at the highest levels. The hearing became a reference point for discussions about ethics, governance, and the responsibility of public servants to the citizenry. Long-term, the confrontation hinted at a shift in political culture. Crockett's actions reinforced progressive values of accountability and civic responsibility, demonstrating that thorough preparation, integrity, and fearless questioning could shape narratives and influence policy for young civic-minded viewers. It served as a reminder that oversight matters, that democracy requires vigilance, and that truth is not negotiable. The legacy of the moment would endure. A single question, delivered with precision and courage, had created ripples that extended far beyond the room, inspiring both public trust and the expectation that those in power answer honestly, fully, and transparently. The story isn't over, and you cannot afford to miss what comes next. Every development, every response, and every revelation will shape the future of accountability, governance, and public trust, and you deserve to be the first to witness it. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and become part of the audience that experiences history as it unfolds, not as a distant headline. Comment, engage, and share your perspective. Your voice matters in this conversation. Join a community of civic-minded viewers who understand the stakes, who demand transparency, and who won't let evasions go unnoticed. Every like, every comment, every alert ensures your position to see the next chapter live, in real time, before the rest of the world even catches up. This isn't just about watching a hearing, it's about standing at the forefront of truth, integrity, and accountability. Don't let history slip by while you wait for someone else to summarize it. Be here. Be informed. Be part of the story. The next pivotal moment is coming, and you need to see it first. Moments like today don't come often. They are the rare instances when courage, preparation, and moral clarity converge to illuminate the truth, exposing evasions that might otherwise have remained hidden. Jasmine Crockett's unwavering commitment to accountability reminds us that power is never beyond scrutiny, and that the principles of justice and transparency are not abstract ideals, they are responsibilities we all share. This confrontation was more than a political exchange, it was a demonstration of what happens when integrity meets diligence. It showed that one determined voice, armed with evidence and conviction, can shift the balance of power, challenge deception, and reinforce the standards that underpin our democracy. The ripple effects will be felt far beyond this room, in policy decisions, in public perception, and in the very expectation that leaders answer honestly to the people they serve. Remember this day. Let it inspire vigilance, courage, and engagement. Let it remind you that democracy thrives when citizens demand truth and refuse to accept obfuscation. Carry forward the fight for transparency, for accountability, and for integrity in every corner of public life. You've witnessed history in motion. Now take that inspiration into action, and ensure that truth always has a champion.